So, here's the thing, life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect it. I, 24, male, had just lost my dad to cancer, and I was still trying to process that gut punch when things started spiraling out of control. My dad's passing hit me hard, but nothing could have prepared me for the storm that followed. My stepmom, Rachel, 45, had been in my life for years, but we never really got along. She was, well, a stepmom. And we all know how that relationship can go. When my dad died, I didn't think things would get complicated. But man, I was so wrong. Rachel didn't waste any time. Within days, she started making it clear that the house, my dad's house, was going to be her house now. The place that had been my home for nearly 2 decades. The place where I spent countless hours with my dad, building memories, sharing laughs, enduring his dad jokes, the ones that never failed to make me groan. It was all suddenly under threat. She came at me with the coldest look in her eyes, a businesslike tone in her voice. "You need to move out," she said, like it was no big deal. "The house is mine now." I swear, it felt like the air in the room thickened. There was no sympathy in her words. No warmth. Just the finality of someone who thought they had all the power. But here's the thing, Rachel had no idea what she was stepping into. Not the slightest clue. See, my dad had this habit of doing things quietly. If he wanted something done, he didn't shout about it, didn't ask for attention. He just made sure things were handled. And when it came to the house, well, let's just say Rachel didn't know that the house wasn't even legally hers to take. Now, I wasn't exactly sure of all the legal details at the time. I didn't have the best grasp of things like deeds or wills, and honestly, I was too wrapped up in grief to even care. But my dad had always been meticulous, and in the midst of this mess, I had a sinking feeling that he might have planned something for this exact scenario. It's like he knew something would go down with her. I tried to keep my cool, but as Rachel stood there, demanding that I leave as if she owned everything in sight, something inside me snapped. I was already dealing with the loss of my dad, the one person who understood me like no one else. Now, this woman, who I could barely tolerate when my dad was alive, was trying to take everything from me? It didn't sit right. My pulse was racing as I stood there, trying to figure out my next move. But the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. Rachel had underestimated me. She had no clue what my dad had done. He'd never been one to leave things to chance, especially when it came to me. And that's when it hit me, this wasn't just about grief anymore. This was about defending my home. There was no way in hell I was just going to pack up and leave. Not without a fight. But I wasn't going to let her see that I was already planning my next step. No. I needed to stay calm, play it cool. Because if there was one thing I knew for sure, it was this: she had no idea who she was up against. I had no idea what I was doing. Seriously. I was standing there in my dad's living room, my stepmom giving me this cold, calculating look like she was sizing up her next victim. I could feel the heat rising in my chest, but I tried to keep it in check. Grief? Gone. That wasn't on my mind anymore. No, now I was just trying to figure out how to hold on to what was mine. "You're still here," she said, like she couldn't even believe I was still standing in her way. Her voice was laced with that smugness I hated so much. I didn't answer right away. I wanted to, trust me, I wanted to. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the grief still messing with my head, or maybe I knew I needed to stay calm. So I just stared back at her, refusing to give an inch. She crossed her arms, her gaze sharp as a knife. "I gave you time to get your stuff together. But you're clearly not getting the hint. This is my house now. You need to pack up and leave." And just like that, the whole world felt like it was spinning out of control. My heart raced, my palms started sweating. My dad's house, our house, was slipping through my fingers, and there was nothing I could do about it. Or so I thought. But then, I remembered something. My dad had always been careful. Like, ridiculously so. He didn't leave things to chance. There was something I hadn't quite figured out yet, but I knew it was there, tucked away somewhere. I had to act fast. But how? Rachel wasn't the type of person who would back down easily. I could see that now. This wasn't about her just wanting to live in the house. No, it was about control. She wanted it all, and she thought I'd just roll over. But there was no way I was letting her take everything my dad had worked for. No way in hell. So, I started asking questions. "You sure about that?" I said, my voice steady, though my mind was racing 1,000 miles a minute. "You're really claiming this house as yours?" She didn't flinch, not for a second. "Yes. Your dad left it to me. It's all in the paperwork. You're not even on the deed." That hit me like a punch to the gut. My stomach twisted, but I kept my cool. I didn't have the energy to argue with her, not like this. I had to find another way in. Maybe she was right, I thought. Maybe she had all the legal stuff. But I couldn't let her get away with just taking everything. "I'll be out by the end of the week," I said, trying to sound like I was conceding. But inside, I was screaming. I could feel the walls closing in. I had no idea what I was going to do next. She smiled, like she'd already won. But I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was off. If she was right, if everything was as simple as she said, why didn't I feel a little more settled? Why was I still holding onto this feeling in the pit of my stomach? And that's when I got the call. I'll admit it, I wasn't expecting anything helpful from the lawyer. But when he said my dad had made arrangements for the house, I felt my blood run cold. The words trust, will, and property kept swirling around in my brain, and it felt like the world had just dropped a bombshell on me. What if Rachel was wrong? I needed to know what my dad had really done, and fast. So I did what anyone would do when they're desperate, looked up the name of the law firm my dad used. A quick call to them, a few hours of waiting, and I finally got someone on the phone who sounded a lot more professional than I'd expected. "Mr. Mitchell, your father had a very specific arrangement," the voice on the other end said. "We'll need you to come in to discuss it, but I can tell you this much. There are details about the house that your stepmother is unaware of." I felt this rush of hope surge through me, and suddenly, the idea of letting her take control didn't seem so inevitable anymore. But I had to be smart about this. I couldn't just waltz back into that house and expect Rachel to back off just because I knew a little more about the situation. No, I needed something solid, something that would shut her down for good. It was a dangerous game now. The stakes were higher than ever. If I messed this up, if I went in unprepared, Rachel would have no problem throwing me out on the street. But if I played my cards right, well, let's just say it was going to be a very interesting next few days. I could feel my pulse picking up as I hung up the phone. This was it. This was my shot. But now, I had to figure out how I was going to make it count. If I could prove Rachel wrong, if I could find the paperwork that would blow her claim to pieces, then maybe, just maybe, I'd win back the one thing that meant the most to me. But for now, all I could do was wait. And let me tell you, waiting? That's when the real trouble started. The days after that phone call felt like they dragged on forever. I couldn't stop thinking about the lawyer's words, "Your stepmother is unaware of the details." That single sentence, so simple, yet loaded with so much potential, kept ringing in my head. Was there something in my dad's will I didn't know about? Was she really so sure of herself because she hadn't even checked the legal stuff? Or had she somehow managed to get everything by some other means? I needed answers, and I needed them fast. I made an appointment to meet with the lawyer, and as I sat in that office, it felt like my entire world was about to shift. The walls of the office were lined with certificates and legal books, fancy, important-looking stuff that I had zero interest in, but I couldn't help feeling out of place. This wasn't my world. I had never cared much for legal jargon or all the intricacies that came with it. But now, I had no choice but to dive headfirst into it. The lawyer, a guy named Mr. Curtis, was an older man with sharp eyes and a voice that oozed authority. He sat me down and started going through papers, explaining the will in the driest way possible. I tried to follow, but honestly, I was too focused on the one thing that really mattered, the house. That was the battleground, the place where the war between me and Rachel was being fought. "We've got a few key details in your father's will that are important," Mr. Curtis said, sliding a stack of papers toward me. He tapped a specific page with his pen. "The house, specifically. Your stepmother is not the sole owner. In fact, she's not even listed as a primary beneficiary in this will." I sat there for a second, letting the words sink in. Rachel had lied. She had no claim. And I was sitting on the one thing that could take all her control away from her. The adrenaline hit me hard. I felt like I was finally in the driver's seat. For the first time since my dad's passing, I actually had something to hold on to. I wasn't going to just let Rachel waltz in and take everything. No way. But the lawyer wasn't done. He pushed the papers closer to me, a grin tugging at his lips. "Your father left a clause in his will. A pretty unusual one, actually. He made sure that the house could only be passed down to you under certain conditions. This clause effectively makes you the sole owner of the property. Your stepmother, on the other hand, has nothing to stand on." It hit me like a ton of bricks. I could hardly believe it. There was a catch, though. A condition I hadn't expected. "The condition is simple," Mr. Curtis continued. "You have to be the one to prove ownership. Prove it by showing that you can maintain the house as your primary residence for a period of 6 months after your father's death. Only then will the deed be legally transferred into your name. Until that time, it's a little unsettled." I blinked, my mind racing. 6 months? That was a lifetime, especially with Rachel breathing down my neck every day, trying to push me out the door. But at least it was something. At least I had a fighting chance. It wasn't going to be easy, but if I could hang on for those 6 months, I'd win. And then I could throw her out on her ass. With that, I left the office feeling like the weight of the world had just shifted onto my shoulders. But the real challenge was just beginning. Because now, I had to get Rachel to back off without telling her everything. I needed her to stay in the dark about the clause in my dad's will. If she found out that I was the rightful owner and that she had no legal claim, she'd make life miserable. I knew that for sure. I got back to the house and saw Rachel pacing by the front door, her arms folded, looking like she was trying to figure out how to destroy me emotionally. It was the same old game, just with a different power struggle. The thing was, she had no clue that I was now playing with the trump card. "You're still here?" she asked, her voice dripping with venom. I shrugged, trying to act as casual as possible. "Yeah. Guess I'm not going anywhere just yet." Her face twitched, like she was trying to keep it together. "I told you, I'm giving you until the end of the week to pack up. Don't make me get the authorities involved." "The authorities? Please." I could have laughed if I wasn't so damn furious. The thing was, I had to play it cool. I couldn't let her see the fire that was burning inside of me. "Sure. I'll get out when I'm ready," I said, pushing past her, not even flinching. She stormed off, muttering under her breath, but I could feel her eyes on me the entire time. It was like she was waiting for me to cave, but I wasn't going to let her. Not now. That night, I spent hours reading over the will again and again, trying to get every last detail right. I needed to be ready. If Rachel came at me again with any legal threats, I had to be prepared to shut her down. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized something else. I didn't just need to wait for 6 months. I had to get my stepmom to make a mistake. I had to push her to make a move so I could play my hand. I had my plan. Now, all I had to do was survive the next few days with Rachel at her most unpredictable. The whole thing came to a head much sooner than I expected. It was like Rachel had been holding her breath, just waiting for me to slip up. And then it happened, one of those moments where everything shifts in the blink of an eye. I was in the kitchen, grabbing a snack, when she stormed in, practically shaking with fury. "I'm done being patient," she spat, slamming a thick envelope onto the counter between us. "This is my house. I've had enough of you living here, acting like it's yours. I'm giving you one last chance to get out before I get the law involved." She'd been threatening me for days, and I'd been playing the waiting game, keeping my cards close. But this was different. She wasn't bluffing anymore. There was fire in her eyes. The kind of fire that said she would do whatever it took to get me out. I stayed calm, like I had been practicing in my head for weeks. I didn't flinch. Didn't even let my heart race. "What's that?" I nodded toward the envelope, trying to play it cool. "More threats?" Her lips curled into a smile, but it wasn't friendly. It was the kind of smile you get when you think you've won. "This, my dear, is a legal notice," she said, emphasizing the words like I should be scared. "I'm starting the eviction process. I've had enough of you taking advantage of my generosity. This house isn't yours, and you need to move out." I stared at the envelope, feeling a sense of dread creeping up my spine. The threat was real this time. But something in the back of my mind was telling me she was playing right into my hands. The problem was, I didn't know exactly what to do yet. I couldn't just let her get away with this. But at the same time, I had to make sure I wasn't exposing my hand too soon. "I don't think you understand, Rachel," I said, keeping my voice steady. "You're not the one in charge here. You never were." She scoffed, throwing her hands up. "Oh, please. Don't act like you're the one in charge. You're just some kid with no idea what's going on. Your father left me everything, and you're nothing but a guest in my home. So get out." My blood was boiling now, but I couldn't let it show. I took a deep breath and stood up straighter. "You think you know everything, don't you? About the house. About my dad. You're wrong." Her eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" I looked her right in the eye, not breaking my gaze. "You've been trying to push me out because you think you have a claim to this house. But you don't. This house isn't even legally yours. It's mine." I watched her face change. For a second, there was this flicker of disbelief. Like she couldn't process what I was saying. Then it was replaced with anger, pure, unfiltered rage. "You're lying," she growled, stepping closer. "There's no way you could be on the deed. You're just a kid who has no idea what he's talking about. My lawyer already confirmed everything." I shook my head slowly, letting the words sink in. "Your lawyer was wrong. And you didn't bother to check the details. My dad made sure everything was taken care of. He wanted me to have this house. It's mine, legally. And I don't have to leave." Her face turned an ugly shade of red. For a second, I thought she was going to throw something at me. But then, something shifted. It was like she realized she wasn't in control anymore. That moment was the turning point. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the papers the lawyer had given me, the official will, the clause about the house, and the proof that Rachel had no legal claim to it. I slapped the stack down on the table between us, watching her reaction closely. Her eyes flicked down to the papers, and for a split second, I could see her confidence crack. "No," she muttered, her voice trailing off as she reached for the papers with shaking hands. I didn't let her grab them right away. I waited for the moment to hit her full force. "It's all in here," I said, pointing to the document. "Your lawyer missed the clause. My dad made sure this house could never pass to anyone else. And I'm the one who gets to decide who stays here." She froze. And for the first time since my dad passed, I saw her truly lose it. Her hands trembled as she flicked through the pages, her face twisting in confusion, frustration, and, dare I say it, fear. "This can't be right. You're lying. You must have forged these," she spat, her voice cracking. I felt a mix of satisfaction and relief flood over me. But I couldn't let up now. She was dangerous when she was backed into a corner. "No, Rachel. I'm not lying. My dad took care of it all. And you really should have read the fine print before you tried to throw me out." Her eyes flicked up to mine, and for a moment, I thought she might actually break down. But then, like a switch flipping, she straightened up, a mask of pure defiance falling over her face. "This isn't over," she hissed, before storming out of the room. And as I stood there, holding the papers in my hands, I realized that I had just won a battle. But this was far from over. Rachel wouldn't go down without a fight. No, she was going to come back swinging. But for now, I had the upper hand. And that was enough. It wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I knew that much. Rachel stormed off that day, her anger practically radiating off her, but I didn't think for a second that she was done. No, this was just the beginning. She dug herself in too deep, and there was no way she was just going to give up. The next few days were tense. She kept her distance, but I could feel the pressure mounting. I could see the way her eyes narrowed whenever she passed me in the hallway. I knew she was plotting her next move, just waiting for the right time to strike. I wasn't naive enough to think I had won the war yet. But for the first time in weeks, I actually felt like I had a shot at coming out on top. The weight of my dad's house didn't feel like a burden anymore. It felt like a shield, something I could hold up and protect myself with. That damn piece of paper, the will, was my lifeline, the one thing that Rachel couldn't touch. And that gave me the confidence I needed to face whatever came next. It didn't take long for her to make her move. A week later, she showed up with a lawyer, a real one this time, not some flashy young guy who only had a clue about half of what he was doing. This lawyer was experienced, sharp, and looked like he could chew through legal red tape like it was nothing. He wasn't here to chat. He was here for business. And he made that clear the second he walked in. Rachel didn't bother with pleasantries. She just stood there, her arms crossed, her eyes locked on me like she was daring me to try something. The lawyer, on the other hand, was all business. He took a seat, spread out some documents, and got straight to the point. "Look, I'm sure you're under some misapprehension about the will," he began, his voice cold, almost dismissive. "But we've already reviewed everything, and we're prepared to contest these claims. It's not as clear-cut as you think." I felt my blood pressure spike. Contested? What the hell did that mean? Was this going to drag out for months? Years? My hands clenched into fists, but I forced myself to stay calm. I wasn't about to let some lawyer talk circles around me. "I don't know what your lawyer told you, Rachel," I said, my voice steady, "but I'm the one who legally owns the house. Not you. And I'm not going anywhere." She didn't flinch at my words. In fact, she seemed almost smug, like she was waiting for the shoe to drop. The lawyer flipped through the pages of his files, clearly looking for something. Then he smiled like he'd found a nugget of gold. "Ah, here it is. The clause in question. It's a bit tricky, but not impossible to challenge. He looked up at me, his eyes cold as ice. There's a technicality in the wording of the will that we can exploit. If we argue that the intent behind your father's wishes was not legally sound, we might just be able to have this whole thing thrown out. My stomach twisted. A technicality? This could get ugly. But I didn't have time to back down now. I couldn't. Before I could speak, Rachel jumped in, her voice dripping with smug satisfaction. You see? You're not going to win this. My lawyer's already digging into the details, and will be taking you to court. I wasn't sure what to say. Part of me wanted to lash out, to scream at her for everything she'd done. But I knew that wouldn't get me anywhere. So instead, I nodded slowly. Okay. Let's take it to court. But know this, I'm not backing down. The next few weeks were a blur. I was buried in legal documents, meeting with the lawyer every other day, doing everything I could to prepare for what felt like an inevitable showdown. Rachel, of course, kept pushing. She sent letters, made phone calls, had her lawyer drop by to negotiate. But none of it mattered. I had the documents. I had the truth. The pressure was intense. There were days when I didn't know how I was going to keep it together. It felt like the entire world was watching, waiting for me to screw up. But each time I thought I might buckle, I reminded myself why I was fighting so hard. This wasn't just about the house. It was about respect. It was about proving to myself, and to Rachel, that I wasn't going to let her walk all over me, like she thought she could. And then, just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, the breakthrough came. Rachel's lawyer messed up. He missed a crucial deadline to submit one of the legal motions. I didn't know it at the time, but this mistake would be the beginning of the end for her. A few days later, I got a call from my lawyer. "We've won," he said, his voice calm but triumphant. "The court has ruled in your favor. The house is yours." I could hardly believe it. After everything, after weeks of tension, uncertainty, and endless back and forth, I had won. The house was mine. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, like I could finally breathe again. And Rachel? Well, she didn't take it well. She was furious, of course. But there was nothing she could do. The court had spoken, and it was over. As for me, I finally had peace. The house, my dad's house, was mine. And no one was going to take it from me. Not ever again.